January 22nd, 1879. Isandlwana. The Zulu warriors stood victorious on a field soaked in British blood. Over 1,300 redcoats lay dead. An entire column equipped with modern rifles, artillery, and the confidence of the world's greatest empire had been annihilated in just a few hours. It was the most catastrophic defeat the British Empire had suffered at the hands of an indigenous army ever. For the Zulu Kingdom, it felt like proof that their courage could overcome technology, that their tactics could defeat industrialized warfare, that their king, Eshowe, was destined to drive the invaders into the sea. They celebrated. They sang songs of their warriors' bravery. They believed they were invincible. But victory has a dangerous way of blinding you to what's coming next. Because while the Zulus celebrated their greatest triumph, the British Empire wasn't accepting defeat. It was preparing for revenge. Cold, calculated, overwhelming. 72 days later, on a muddy ridge called Gingindlovu, those two forces would collide again. But this time, the Zulus wouldn't be charging a panicked, disorganized enemy caught by surprise. They'd be advancing into a perfectly engineered death trapper fortress of wagons, trenches, and firepower designed specifically to turn their greatest strength into their most fatal weakness. What happened at Gingindlovu wasn't just a battle. It was the systematic destruction of an army's spirit, the shattering of a kingdom's confidence. The moment when courage extraordinary, almost superhuman courage learned it wasn't enough to stop bullets fired by the thousand. This is the story of how the Zulu dream died in 20 minutes of mechanized slaughter. Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford was a broken man. After Isandlwana, his career was over, his reputation destroyed. London newspapers were screaming for his head. His replacement, Sir Garnet Wolseley, was already on a ship steaming towards South Africa to relieve him of command. Every decision he'd made that day haunted him, splitting his forces, underestimating the enemy, failing to fortify the camp, leaving his men vulnerable. 1,300 soldiers dead because of his arrogance. The weight of those bodies crushed him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the battlefield, the bodies, the mutilations, the horror. But buried beneath that guilt was something else, something harder, something colder. Rage equals not the hot, impulsive rage that makes men reckless, the icy, calculating rage that makes them methodical, merciless, determined to prove the disaster wasn't because the Zulus were superior, was because he had made tactical errors that would never be repeated. Chelmsford had one chance for redemption before Wolseley arrived to fire him. Rescue Colonel Pearson S. Column, trapped at Eshowe. For 10 weeks, Pearson and 1,700 men had been surrounded, cut off, slowly starving while disease ravaged them. A helograph mirror flashing messages from 22 miles away was their only connection to the outside world. Saving them wouldn't erase Isandlwana, but it might buy Chelmsford enough goodwill to avoid complete disgrace. So, he assembled a new army at Fort Tenedos, and this time everything would be different. This force numbered over 5,600 men roughly, 3,400 European regulars, and 2,300 African auxiliaries from the native contingent. Battle-hardened regiments formed the core: the 57th Regiment, the 91st Highlanders with their distinctive kilts and bagpipes, the 60th Rifles known for their marksmanship, and this time they brought the Royal Navy. Sailors and Marines hauled massive weapons, to 9-pounder field guns, for 24-pounder rocket tubes, and most terrifying of Alto Gatling guns. Those hand-cranked mechanical demons that could spit hundreds of bullets per minute. But the biggest change wasn't the weapons, it was the philosophy. Arrogance was gone, replaced by paranoia, caution, obsessive preparation. Chelmsford issued new orders that would have seemed insane before Isandlwana, but now felt like basic survival. Every single time they stopped even for an hour, they would form a defensive laager, heavy wagons chained together in a tight rectangle, men digging trenches inside, earthworks piled chest-high, ammunition boxes opened and ready. Every camp would be a fortress. The advance began on March 29, 1879. It was agonizingly slow. Heavy rains had turned the landscape into a swamp, but Chelmsford deliberately chose a longer, more exposed route to avoid terrain that could hide an ambush. This was an army that no longer believed in its own invincibility. It believed in procedure, discipline, and the mathematics of firepower. They advanced like a wounded animal, paranoid, defensive, but infinitely more dangerous than before. Meanwhile, at Ulundi, King Eshowe faced his own calculations. Isandlwana had been glorious. His warriors had proven their courage. But Eshowe was no fool. He knew the British Empire wouldn't accept defeat. They would return with more men, more guns, more determination. The victory at Isandlwana had bought him time and prestige, but it hadn't won the war. When scouts reported Chelmsford's massive relief column crawling toward Eshowe, Eshowe assembled another Impia roughly 10,000 to 12,000 warriors and gave them a simple mission: find Chelmsford, destroy him, just like Isandlwana. Many of these warriors were veterans of that famous battle, men who had charged through British rifle fire, smashed their defensive line, and fought hand-to-hand with bayonets and spears. Men who had tasted victory against the world's most powerful army. They were confident, eager, ready to prove Isandlwana wasn't a fluke. It was the new reality. Command fell to two experienced leaders, Samofo Kosciuszko and, more critically, Prince Dabulamonsi, Kampanda King Eshowe's ambitious half-brother. Dabulamonsi was famous for his aggression. After Isandlwana, he had led the unauthorized attack on Rorke's drifter, reckless assault against a fortified position that cost hundreds of Zulu lives for no gain. That failure had embarrassed him. Now he had a chance to erase it with another glorious victory. As Chelmsford's column slogged through the mud toward Eshowe, Dabulamonsi's Impi moved swiftly to intercept them. The two armies were converging on a collision course. The Zulus carried the weight of recent victory. The British carried the ghost of recent disaster. Something had to break. April 1st, 1879. Evening, Chelmsford's column reached a low ridge near a royal kraal called Gingindlovu. It offered good visibility in all directions, exactly what he wanted. As dusk fell, so did torrential rain. But the work didn't stop. Following Chelmsford's obsessive new protocols, the men immediately began construction. 20 heavy wagons were dragged into position and chained together, forming a tight rectangle roughly 130 yards on each side. Then came the digging. Soldiers worked in shifts through the night, excavating a trench 4 feet deep around the entire perimeter. The excavated earth was piled on the inside, creating a waist-high wall studded with loopholes for rifles. Each side was assigned to a specific regiment: North Face, 60th Rifles; West Face, 99th Regiment; South Face, 57th Regiment; East Face, 91st Highlanders. At the corners, the most vulnerable points, the heavy weapons were positioned. Gatling guns and rocket tubes positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would sweep the flanks. This wasn't a camp. It was a killing machine. Inside, ammunition was stacked everywhere. Every man knew exactly where his firing position was. Officers walked the line, checking sight lines, calculating distances, making minor adjustments. By midnight, they were as ready as humans could be, but were they ready enough? Chelmsford's chief scout, John Dunn, a European who had lived in Zululand for years and spoke fluent Zulu, was convinced that Impi was close. Too close. That night, Dunn and another officer snuck out of the laager, swam the swollen Nyazane River, and crept through enemy territory. What they found made their blood run cold. The entire Zulu army was camped just a few miles away. They barely escaped detection and raced back to warn Chelmsford. The attack was coming at dawn. Inside the Zulu camp, there was debate. Some commanders wanted to attack immediately at night, when British firepower would be less effective, but Dabulamunzi overruled them. They would wait for daylight. They would use the traditional tactics, the impondo zankomo, the horns of the buffalo, just like at Isandlwana. It was a fatal decision. At 4 a.m. on April 2nd, every British soldier stood to arms, silent, waiting, staring into the pre-dawn darkness. A thick mist blanketed the landscape, cutting visibility to almost nothing. The air was dead silent except for the nervous breathing of thousands of men. Chelmsford made his final decision. They wouldn't advance to Eshowe. They would stay. Let the Zulus come to them. As the sun rose, the mist began to lift, slowly, gradually, and then they saw them. Around 5:45 a.m., lookouts from the native contingent came sprinting back to the laager, eyes wide with terror. Minutes later, the definitive report came. A native soldier pointed toward the horizon and said one word, Impi, and there they were. As the last wisps of mist burned away in the morning sun, the entire Zulu army revealed itself, first to the northeast, the left horn, spreading wide, then to the west, pouring over a ridge called Umisi, Hiltha, massive central chest, and the powerful right horn, led by Dabulamunzi himself. One British observer later wrote, "It looked like a dark streak of bushes bordering a stream, until I realized the stream was moving. Over 10,000 warriors, moving in 3 massive columns designed to surround and crush them. Black shields glinting, spear blades flashing, war plumes bobbing. They advanced in perfect formation, silent at first, disciplined, deadly. Then they broke into their loping runner pace they could maintain for miles, and the ground began to tremble. The Zulu war chant started low, building to a deafening roar. Spears beat against shields in rhythm, a sound designed to strike terror into their enemies' hearts. From concealed positions in the tall grass, Zulu marksmen opened fire. Shots cracked randomly, most flying high over British heads due to incorrectly set rifle sights, but adding to the psychological pressure. Inside the laager, British officers walked the line, voices calm and steady. "Hold your fire, lads. Hold your fire. Let them come." The Zulus charged. The 3 great columns swept forward like a living tide, aiming to drown the British square in a human flood. 400 yards, 350. 300 British soldiers gripped their Martini-Henry rifles, fingers on triggers, waiting for the command. The tension was unbearable. Then, at roughly 300 yards, the order finally came. Fire. The entire northern face of the laager erupted. The volley was so synchronized it sounded like a single enormous explosion. Hundreds of Martini-Henry rifles firing simultaneously. A solid wall of white smoke billowed out, momentarily obscuring everything, but the effect was visible immediately. The front ranks of the charging Zulu chest disappeared, not retreated, not ducked. Disappeared as if an invisible scythe had cut them down. The .577 caliber bullets were massive soft lead that transferred tremendous kinetic energy on impact. They didn't just wound, they smashed bones, tore through multiple bodies, threw men backward with horrifying force. Before the Zulus could even process what had happened, the mechanized killing began. At the corners, Royal Navy sailors began cranking the handles of their Gatling guns. The distinctive rapid-fire chatter-chatter filled the air. Streams of bullets hundreds per minute poured into the dense Zulu formations. Shields were useless. The heavy rounds punched through cowhide like paper and kept going, hitting the men behind them. Artillery shells screamed overhead, exploding in the middle of warrior columns. Rocket tubes launched their terrifying projectiles, sensible, inaccurate, but psychologically devastating. The rockets would scream across the battlefield, trailing fire and smoke before exploding randomly, adding to the chaos. The Zulus didn't break, they didn't run. With courage that defies imagination, they tried to press the attack. Warriors scrambled over growing piles of their own dead and wounded, trying desperately to close the distance to where their spears could be effective. Some went to ground, using any available cover and hills, rocks, grass, clumps, but the momentum was gone. The charge had become a massacre. They never got close. The closest any Zulu warrior reached the British trenches was roughly 30 yards. Most died much farther out, cut down at 100, 150, 200 yards by the relentless storm of lead. The attack on the north face faltered, flowed around to the west, where it merged with Dabulamanzi's right horn for another assault. The same horrific scene repeated. Disciplined volleys from the 99th Regiment combined with Gatling gun fire created another impenetrable wall of death. On the eastern and southern faces, the 91st Highlanders and 57th Regiment met the Zulu left horn with equally devastating firepower. The Impando Zankoma, the horns of the buffalo that had crushed the British at Isandlwana, was being systematically destroyed. The tactic designed to encircle and overwhelm an enemy worked perfectly. When the enemy was scattered, surprised, disorganized, against a prepared defensive square with interlocking fields of fire, it was suicide. The entire battle lasted maybe 20 minutes, but in that short time, the finest warriors of the Zulu Kingdom were mowed down like grass. Finally, inevitably, the charges faltered. Warriors began to hesitate, then fall back. The war cries died down, replaced by the screams of wounded men. Chelmsford saw his moment. The gates of the Lager swung open. British cavalry lancers and mounted infantry thundered out in pursuit. The Zulu retreat became a rout. Horsemen rode down fleeing warriors mercilessly, exacting revenge for Isandlwana with lance and sabre. By 7:30 a.m. it was over. As the gunsmoke cleared and silence fell over the battlefield, the brutal arithmetic of industrial warfare became clear. British casualties, 13 killed, including 2 officers, about 50 wounded. Among the fatally wounded was Lieutenant Colonel Northey of the 60th Rifles, shot through the shoulder. Zulu casualties, over 700 bodies, counted around the immediate Lager. At least 300 more killed during the mounted pursuit. Total estimates: 1,000 to 1,200 warriors dead, 10 to 1, 15 to 1, 20 to 1 in some sectors. It wasn't a battle, it was industrial-scale killing. British soldiers walked the battlefield afterward, numb and horrified despite their victory. The sheer volume of corpses was staggering. Bodies piled 3 and 4 deep in some places where volleys had caught dense formations. Among the Zulu dead, they found hundreds of modern Martini-Henry rifles, many still bearing the markings of the 24th Regiment from Eshowe. The weapons captured in triumph 70 days ago had been turned back against their captors with devastating effect. The psychological impact was even more profound than the casualty count. For the Zulu warriors who survived, The experience was shattering. At Isandlwana, their courage and tactics had overcome British firepower. Here, that same courage had led them into a killing field from which there was no escape. They had done everything right assembled. A massive force, executed the traditional encirclement tactic perfectly, charged with extraordinary bravery, and it hadn't mattered. They hadn't even reached the enemy. Most had died without striking a single blow. King Secheweo's reaction, when news reached Ulundi, was reportedly immediate and devastating fury. He recognized instantly that his army's offensive power had been broken, losing over 1,000 veteran warriors men who had fought at Isandlwana, men who represented the flower of Zulu military might was, a blow from which the kingdom could not recover. The immediate result of Gingindlovu was the relief of Eshowe. The very next day, April 3rd, Chelmsford marched his column to the besieged fort. Colonel Pearson's exhausted garrison watched as the pipers of the 91st Highlanders marched in, the sound of bagpipes signalling the end of their 10-week nightmare. For Lord Chelmsford, it was redemption. Not complete as Isandlwana would haunt him forever, but enough. He had proven that Isandlwana was a tactical mistake, not evidence of British military inadequacy. But the real significance of Gingindlovu extends far beyond one siege relief. This was the moment the tide turned decisively against the Zulu Kingdom. Isandlwana had created a powerful myth that Zulu courage and traditional tactics could overcome modern European armies, that the Impondo Zankomo was invincible, that King Secheweo's warriors could drive the British Empire into the sea. Gingindlovu shattered that myth in 20 minutes of mechanized slaughter. The survivors returned to their kraals, not with songs of victory, but with haunted stories of an enemy they couldn't reach, weapons they couldn't counter, and a style of warfare their courage alone couldn't defeat. The psychological damage was irreparable. The Zulu army never regained its offensive confidence. From this point forward, they would fight defensively, knowing that attacking a prepared British position meant mass death. When Chelmsford finally advanced on the Zulu capital of Ulundi in July 1879, he used the exact same tactic, a hollow square formation with interlocking fields of fire. The result was the same: another crushing defeat, another 1,000 Zulu warriors dead, while British casualties remained minimal. That final battle at Ulundi is often remembered as the climax of the Anglo-Zulu War, but its outcome was predetermined here. On this muddy ridge at Gingindlovu, where the Zulu dream of driving out the invaders died in a storm of bullets. Historians often frame this battle as proof of technological superiority: rifles over spears, industrial warfare over traditional tactics. And that's true as far as it goes, but it misses something crucial. The Zulus at Gingindlovu displayed almost superhuman courage. They charged into that wall of fire knowing after the first volley exactly what awaited them. They tried again and again to close the distance, despite watching their comrades cut down in waves. They fought with discipline and bravery that would have overcome any army from any previous century, and it wasn't enough. That's the real tragedy of Gingindlovu. Not just that the Zulus lost, but that their extraordinary courage, the kind of bravery that defined their culture and identity, had become strategically meaningless in the face of industrialized killing. They weren't defeated because they lacked courage. They were defeated because courage alone can't stop mathematics. When you can fire 10 rounds per minute from 2,000 rifles, protected behind earthworks, with Gatling guns sweeping your flanks and artillery providing supporting fire, individual bravery becomes irrelevant. You're not fighting warriors anymore. You're remanaging a mathematical equation. Rate of fire times number of rifles times duration of engagement equals enemy casualties. The Zulus had entered that equation on the wrong side. Gingindlovu was where the 19th century Eshowe's great indigenous military kingdom learned that the world had changed, that the age of warriors where personal courage and tactical skill determined battles was ending, that the industrial age had arrived, and it fought wars with machinery, not men. The spear had been shattered by the bullets, and with it the independence of the Zulu Kingdom. Within months, King Eshowe would be captured. His kingdom would be broken into puppet chiefdoms. The Zulu way of life would be systematically dismantled by colonial administrators. All of it was inevitable after Gingindlovu, the battle that lasted 20 minutes but ended a kingdom's dream of sovereignty. Stand on that ridge, today now peaceful, empty grassland in KwaZulu-Natal. Try to imagine what happened here on the morning of April 2nd, 1879. 10,000 warriors charging across this ground, the thunder of their feet, the roar of their war cries, the flash of spear blades in the rising sun, then the eruption of gunfire, the screams, the smoke, the bodies are piling up in waves. It's all over in 20 minutes. The Zulu warriors who died here weren't defeated by cowardice or incompetence. They were defeated by history itself, by the Industrial Revolution that had given one side of this conflict weapons the other side had no answer for. Their courage deserves to be remembered, their sacrifice honored. But so does the brutal lesson of Gingindlovu, that sometimes, in the cold calculus of warfare, courage isn't enough.